Hurricane Harvey, dozens are still being rescued as others begin to deal with the loss of family members. Another angry response from North Korea as the U.S. and South Korea conduct more military drills. And a desperate situation for Rohingya refugees as tens of thousands stream towards Bangladesh. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Cyril Vanier. This is CNN Today. So we begin in Texas, where the death toll from Hurricane Harvey and the aftermath now stands at 39. The White House says that number will almost certainly rise as the floodwaters recede in Houston and the surrounding areas. Vice President Mike Pence right here just spoke in Corpus Christi after a day visiting with storm victims. He says more than 311,000 people have registered for disaster aid. Pence says getting people back into their communities will be a top priority once the rescue process is complete. We've been watching the U.S. Coast Guard in action all day, plucking stranded people from their rooftops. Brian Todd reports on the ongoing rescue effort from Beaumont, Texas.
Southeast Texas flooding, as seen from above, by rescuers urgently trying to save people from the water. A victim on a rooftop catches the attention of a Coast Guard team, and a diver goes down to help. Soon, 2 flood victims are brought up in a basket. Helicopter and boat rescues are ongoing throughout the day, taking advantage of clearing skies and racing to help flood victims. 10,000 have been rescued by federal rescuers alone. Southeast Texas is the latest area to get flooded by a storm that has dumped an estimated 27 trillion gallons on Texas and Louisiana. Beaumont's hospital had to close and evacuate all its existing patients, some by helicopter.
Our ICU patients, our NICU babies, and our dialysis patients are going first because they're the highest level of acuity.
That's because the Beaumont water supply, serving over 100,000 residents, is out. The pumps are flooded. Officials say it could get worse before it gets better.
We think it's going to crest Saturday, is what the National Weather Service was telling us.
Also still looming, more potential blasts at a flooded chemical plant. Residents heard an explosion at the Arkema plant in Crosby, where authorities say tanks of organic peroxide that lost their cooling systems are rupturing.
We can expect similar type of decomposition in those other trailers, maybe even all 9 of them before it's over with.
Anyone within a mile and a half had already been ordered to evacuate, but 15 officers were treated and released for smoke exposure.
The toxicity of the smoke will certainly cause an irritation to your eyes, an irritation to your lungs if you breathe it, just like any smoke.
Rescuers continued in West Houston as well. In some neighborhoods, firefighters are already going door to door, checking if people are okay.
Here's our bedroom.
Tony Rorai said the water in his house was several feet high. He has already started ripping out the walls.
How do you feel about this, Tony? Do you want to stay here?
No, not now.
Authorities believe Houston's floodwaters have passed their high point, but today they issued new evacuation orders to stop residents from checking on their homes.
The basic message is if you can't drive to your home, don't go.
Brian Todd is live in Houston. He joins us now. Brian, there were explosions and fires at that chemical plant. You put that in your report. What's the status on that now?
Well, Cyril, we're told that this plant is still in a pretty dangerous situation. There were 2 explosions. This is a plant run by the company called Arkema Incorporated in Crosby, Texas, well east of Houston, but still inside Harris County. This produces organic peroxide, and the systems that produce that and the chemicals themselves need to be cooled. Well, they couldn't be cooled because it was flooded inside that plant, and the cooling systems basically broke down. So they had a couple of explosions there and fires. I think they've said that since that time, those fires have gone out, but it did emit some smoke, and about 15 responders were treated for smoke inhalation. Officials did say that those responders did not inhale anything toxic, but they have still had to keep people within a 1.5-mile radius of that plant away from it. They evacuated it, so still a very dangerous situation. Cyril.
Brian Todd reporting live from Houston. Thank you very much, Brian. And as Brian mentioned earlier, the city of Beaumont, east of Houston, is dealing with a crisis. Floodwaters swamped the city's water pumps, leaving all of Beaumont without water. That means the hospital was forced to evacuate its patients. You're looking at that right now. A spokeswoman says the hospital was taken by surprise.
When we went to bed last night at midnight, we were expecting to have business as usual. We're pretty self-contained. We have our own generators. We had plenty of food and bottled water. We had no idea when we went to bed at midnight that at 1 o'clock we would get the call that says the hospital would need to be thinking about the city's water being lost. We did not expect that, and that's a game changer for us.
All right, so let's see what the weather's actually doing. That's important. The rain has stopped along most of the Gulf Coast, but west of Houston, earthen levees are straining to hold back billions of kiloliters of potential floodwater, and spinning far out in the Atlantic, there may be a new powerful storm in the works. Tom Sater is tracking all of this for us. Tom.
Yeah, we've got an interesting situation. Obviously, it's just been devastating, Cyril, in the last week. But what a storm Harvey has been, setting records, the most rainfall ever from a tropical system in the continental U.S. We believe it broke the all-time U.S. record, but the rain gauge broke. But it doesn't matter. We've got millions that are suffering here. And what a storm. I mean, it was feeding off its own rainfall. It stayed as a named storm for 117 hours. The old record was 45. The area of coverage of rainfall, 102 trillion liters. That's the amount of rain that flows over Niagara Falls for 400 straight days. We've seen nearly 250 now tornado warnings, and we're still seeing them fire up. The storm is slowly picking up speed, and that's nice, but we'd like to see it move a little faster. Some good rain around Memphis, nothing like Louisiana or Texas, but the threat for severe weather is still with this area. As we continue to watch its fast progress, this is very good news. The rainfall rates will diminish. We will not have the flooding. But again, the remnants will still be in the U.S. for a couple of days. As the system breaks down, we'll watch it move into the northeast. And we do have to be concerned still with the rivers. We had 58 rivers at major flood stage, so now only 29, which means the rivers are flowing into the larger tributaries. Most of these, however, at record crest, and some could stay at record crest for over a week. That's a problem. Now, to the levees. Houston is out here at the end of this. This is the Buffalo Bayou. These two levees right now, I mean, they hold considerable amount of water right now, but they are earthen, as Cyril mentioned. They are not made of concrete. They are overtopping and flooding all of these houses that you see here. Back in 1953, it was ranch land. This is what it looked like. No one lived out here for a few ranchers, cattle ranchers, and they built this levee to pull in, to catch the water so they could control the flow. Well, with urban sprawl, you've got thousands and thousands of homes. Right now, we have over 100 subdivisions that have been evacuated, and we've got 1 to 2 meters of water in over 4,000. But the pressure against this levee can be so great, coupled with the water topping over with erosion, it could give until those waters recede. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers saying they don't think that's going to happen. They think this is going to work, but it's never been tested before, and it's 70 years old. Here's our next concern. All the way from Miami off past, just past the Cabo Verde Islands, Category 3 will be a Category 4 by Monday. It's got its eyes on the Caribbean and the southeastern U.S. Computer models still speculating possibly this could make its way to the Carolinas, maybe Florida, or possibly even bypass Florida and move into the Gulf of Mexico. But first and foremost, formidable storm for the Leeward Islands by Monday. We'll be talking about this one next weekend, Cyril, in the U.S.
Tom Sater joining us from the CNN Severe Weather Center. Thank you very much, Tom. And as he wraps up his tour of hurricane-hit areas in southeast Texas, the United States Vice President, Mike Pence, is promising robust federal help to rebuild the region. And he says the White House is already talking to Congress about getting billions of dollars of relief and recovery funding flowing to the state of Texas. White House correspondent Athena Jones comes to us now from Washington. Athena, you'll get to that second in a question. Funding, it is key, but also symbols are important. And what we saw today was the Vice President really getting stuck in and really sort of taking part in the clearance effort.
Hi, that's right. We saw the Vice President making several stops in those hard-hit areas in South Texas along the coast, including Rockport, a town that was that bore a lot of the brunt of the wind damage of the storm when it first came ashore last week. And we saw the Vice President offering prayers for the victims of Hurricane Harvey alongside his wife and the governor of Texas. We saw him at different points today hugging a lot of people and also even helping to clear debris, lifting several branches in an area and moving them to another area. So the Vice President spoke many times, sort of these off-the-cuff, extemporaneous remarks that you expect to see from a politician. But it was a very different tone and a very different comfort level than what we saw from President Trump, at least on his first visit, where he didn't have any interactions with people who were actually affected by the storm. Now, the reason for that is the White House said they didn't want to take away any of the resources that would be going to search and rescue efforts and have them moved over to the logistics and the infrastructure needed to protect the president. But because he didn't have any direct contact with hurricane victims, some people felt that maybe he should have waited to go. Well, now the president is going back to Texas this weekend on Saturday. He's also planning to visit Louisiana, and we expect that we could see him interact with people affected the way we saw Vice President Mike Pence do. But I want to mention that the vice president did speak about his hopes and the White House's hopes that Congress would approve funding to aid the victims of the storm very, very quickly. Listen to what he had to say.
We expect Congress to move quickly on the initial legislation, and we'll be working very diligently in the opening weeks of Congress to accomplish that. But let me say we're very confident that members of Congress in both political parties appreciate the historic nature of this storm and understand the enormous burden that it's placed on families and communities here in Texas, and we anticipate strong and bipartisan support for that measure.
So there you heard the vice president saying that they hope that Congress will act quickly to provide this aid to those people who need it very, very badly in this still ongoing natural disaster. I should note that the acting director of the Department of Homeland Security, the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, said that the government has already approved some 100,000 aid requests for individual assistance totaling some $50 million. So we're talking about perhaps a lot of money. Those estimates still coming in. And I should mention that several White House officials, when asked exactly when the White House would be making this aid request to Congress, wouldn't be specific. But one official I spoke with, Mark Short, who is the White House Director of Legislative Affairs, said they should have something ready and a number to ask Congress for that initial package of aid by next week. Back to you.
All right, Athena Jones reporting live from Washington. Thank you very much. All right, let's shift away from the storm and also now bring you the latest on U.S. politics. Developments on an important story there. The probe of Russian interference in last year's election. A source tells CNN that President Trump's legal team has met with special counsel Robert Mueller to discuss the investigation. The story was first reported in the Wall Street Journal, and it is complex. Let's breaking it down with Manu Raju. He's in Washington too. Manu, and let's remember here, Robert Mueller is the man who's investigating the president. So what have Mr. Trump's lawyers been saying to him?
Well, they're trying to make the case that he did not obstruct justice. This is one of the things that Mueller and his team are looking at, whether or not the president took actions, potentially illegal actions, to try to prevent this investigation into his associate, Michael Flynn, former national security advisor, from going forward, and whether or not he tried to tamp down any investigation into him himself. And one of the things that they're looking at are the circumstances around FBI director, the former FBI director, James Comey's firing, and whether or not the president fired him in order to actually prevent himself from being investigated. Now, one of the things that the lawyers have told Comey's team is that the president has a constitutional right to fire whoever he wants. And on top of that, they're saying that Mr. Comey's credibility was tarnished after it turned out that he provided some information about his private conversations to the news media. And they said that he was well within his rights to fire James Comey. Now, on top of that, Cyril, a new development today, Republicans in Congress said they got a copy of a transcript that showed that James Comey, when he had planned to essentially announce that Hillary Clinton was not guilty of a crime during the email investigation last year, before they actually interviewed her, before James Comey and the FBI interviewed her. That is something that is also part of the criticism for Donald Trump going forward, that James Comey did not deserve to stay in that job. So look for that also to be part of that argument. But we do know that the president has publicly said that Russia was on his mind when he fired James Comey.
Absolutely. And another thing, Manu, is we reported weeks ago that the U.S. President Donald Trump was looking into the extent of his pardoning power. And now we understand that the special counsel, Robert Mueller, is conducting his investigation in a way that could allow him to circumvent the president's pardoning power.
Yeah, potentially. He is now, we're told, discussing, working with, and getting cooperation from the New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. And what's interesting about this is that the president has powers to pardon people who are convicted of a federal crime, but not of a state crime, which is why bringing in the New York Attorney General is interesting here. Now, we are told that that's not necessarily why Schneiderman is working with Comey's team. This is actually somewhat expected, according to sources who are telling us about the situation. But it does show a ramped-up investigation, particularly into Paul Manafort, who is President Trump's former campaign chairman, and questions about whether or not he evaded tax laws, as well as broke any other financial laws as part of this investigation. So as part of some of his actions in the past. So that is one big thing they're looking at going forward, but clearly intense focus, a heightened investigation, and something that Paul Manafort needs to be aware of going forward, given that his home, too, was raided by the FBI just last month.
Manu Raju in Washington, thank you very much for helping us understand the latest developments in the investigation by the special counsel. Thank you. And the U.S. has made another move in the game of diplomatic chess it has been playing with Russia. It's ordering Moscow to close 3 diplomatic facilities, including its consulate general in San Francisco. This is in response to mandated staff cuts at the U.S. mission in Russia. The other facilities ordered to be closed are annexes in Washington and New York. They all have to be shut by September 2nd. Russia says it will study the new measures and inform the U.S. of its reaction. Still to come on CNN Today, a look at the struggles of one of the most persecuted peoples in the world. We'll be talking to an expert about the plight of the Rohingya Muslims.
If you really love what you do, you become very passionate about it. Being human, you react from time to time. Sometimes good, people like it, sometimes bad, people don't like it. I've been on both sides.
The circuit meets 4-time Formula One world champion Sebastian Vettel.
The Circuit, Saturday on CNN, in association with DHL.
The markets of the Middle East are some of the most important in the world today, with opportunities around every corner and development that never seems to stop. The Middle East is investing in its future, establishing new relationships every day. But what does the next decade look like for these emerging markets? I'm right in the middle of it, bringing you the answers and analysis you can only get on CNN.
Marketplace Middle East, Sunday on CNN. All new African voices. This week, these musicians are hitting all the right notes.
What I love most about performing is that I can be able to share like what I have in me.
African Voices, Saturday on CNN.
For somebody to tell you their story, it's something I take really seriously, and it's not something you can just parachute in and ask somebody to open their heart to you. To peel away the layers to get to the heart of the person who you're telling a story about.
France will never give up against the terrorists.
And delve beneath the surface of what's happening. You can hear their story, and you're going to do their story justice. You have to show yourself to them.
How high was the water? The water was as tall as that tree.
CNN's the right place to tell their story.
A tragic discovery. Thousands of Rohingya Muslims flee violence in Myanmar, and the bodies of 20 refugees were pulled out of a river along the border with Bangladesh on Thursday. An official says they may have been on a boat that capsized. The Rohingya are considered some of the most persecuted people in the world. Neither Myanmar nor Bangladesh is willing to claim them. Many Rohingya are currently stranded in a no man's land between these two countries. I want to bring in on this topic Sally Smith from Park City, Utah. She's the executive director of NexusFund.org, an organization that she founded to try to help end mass atrocities. Sally, is that what's happening here? A mass atrocity?
That's exactly right. A lot of aid groups have said that the military forces in Myanmar have committed against civilians what amounts to mass atrocities and ethnic cleansing. This is a follow-up on what's happened in last October, but the last few days have seen an insurgency and then led to more violence from the military against civilians.
Is there anyone the Rohingya can count on for help or protection?
You know, I wish there were more of us. There are very few organizations in the world working on this issue. Unfortunately, it feels like there's a new crisis every day in the world, and it's been difficult to get the international community to pay more attention. You do have Kofi Annan, who recently finished up an advisory commission report on Rakhine State and did have really fantastic recommendations on what needs to be done. And as they said in the report, if they're not enacted soon, things will get worse, and that's what we're seeing right now. However, we don't have a lot of people who are working to actually enact them.
Now, the Rohingya started taking up arms last year to defend themselves against the government, and they even went on the attack. But it seems to me their lot is even worse now.
That's right. In the last few days, you know, this is very similar to what happened in October, where you had a small-scale attack by a small number of Rohingya insurgents. And that led to a really disproportionate response by the Myanmar military against civilians, which has included killing them, raping them, even firing machine guns at innocent men, women, and children as they're running toward the border to flee into Bangladesh. And they're burning down villages. It's just not okay to attack civilians.
And how's Bangladesh treating them or reacting to this?
You know, unfortunately, the Rohingya are technically a stateless people. They were stripped of their citizenship in Myanmar. Myanmar says they're from Bangladesh. Bangladesh says they're from Myanmar. So they're really being greeted at the border by people who are then turning them away and saying they don't want them there. You know, the poor Rohingya have really found nowhere to call home and no one to help them, which is really why we're trying to galvanize some support internationally and in Myanmar itself. You know, it's unfortunate that we're seeing extremist nationalism really take root around the world, and this is happening in Myanmar as well. You have Buddhist nationalists who are becoming increasingly more not only nationalist but racist against the Rohingya because of their Muslim heritage.
There's one person in Myanmar who is known the world over. She's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and that's Aung San Suu Kyi. She has a global voice, and she was a peace and democracy campaigner. Why is she not speaking up about this?
You know, it really blows my mind, and I'm so disappointed in her as somebody who really cared about her being freed herself. I mean, she's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And, you know, what it seems like is happening is that she does care about peace for Buddhists, but not for the Rohingya. You know, right now she's using language that is incredibly irresponsible and inflammatory. She's saying that these are terrorists. They've now named them terrorists. And that's really only going to increase what's happening and the tensions that are rising. And it's going to give rise to civilian attacks against Rohingya as well.
Well, look, Sally, I wanted you to address that specifically because that's the government's line here. The government says that it has just been fighting what it calls, I think the word they use is militants. They say they've been fighting militants.
Well, I certainly don't encourage anybody to utilize violence, but these are people who have been persecuted for decades. They have formed a small insurgency. There's a big difference between insurgents and terrorists. These are not terrorists, these are insurgents. And when we start throwing around the word terrorism willy-nilly, it really loses its meaning. And it also, it gives rise to people being, as I said, more violent against them. These are just not terrorists, they're insurgents. And there's a big difference, and it's incredibly irresponsible of the government of Myanmar, and particularly Aung San Suu Kyi, to use that word.
Sally Smith, thank you very much for joining us here on CNN Today. North Korea is lashing out at the U.S. and South Korea after they staged a joint show of force over the Korean peninsula. The North calling their bombing drill a rash act. Pyongyang also said these, quote, wild military acts were due to its recent launch of a ballistic missile over Japan. Well, no disagreement there. The U.S. Pacific Command said the flyover was indeed a direct response to that missile test. On Thursday, the North went on to threaten future launches targeting the Pacific, where the U.S. bases are stationed. State media also warned, quote, it should not be forgotten, even a moment would the whole of South Korea can turn into ruins. Will Ripley is still the only Western TV journalist inside the country at the moment. He comes to us live from the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. Will, I'd like you to react to this. The fact that South Korea and the U.S. have been holding military drills not far from the North Korean border for 2 weeks. And there was also this show of force on Thursday. And that didn't stop from North Korea from testing another missile. So what does that tell us?
Well, it tells us that North Korea is defiant and not backing down, and they have said as such. It's interesting, though, this, at least for the time being, the North Korean immediate response to that flyover, the B-2B bombers and the fighter jets from the United States and South Korea, it was relatively calm by North Korean standards. It doesn't mean that there won't be a more fiery response put out later, but at least for the time being, yes, they called it a rash act. They said it was in response to them launching the Hwasong-12 intermediate-range missile over Japan, but they didn't vow to strike back. They didn't vow further action. It seems as if this missile launch was the North Korean message in response to the military drills, at least for now, until the next provocation. But what North Korea is saying is that this missile was a prelude to future military options aimed at Guam, and they're vowing to fire more missiles toward the Pacific. I'll read you another excerpt of a North Korean statement just put out within the last 24 hours. It says that they will be targeting the Pacific where the U.S. imperialist aggressor forces bases are stationed. And so will this be a new pattern where we now see North Korea firing this kind of missile, but instead of firing it in a trajectory towards Japan or over Japan as they did this week, will they start firing these in a southerly direction? And what will that mean for the United States? If the U.S. detects a missile approaching the U.S. territory of Guam, how will they respond? That's the danger here of the situation escalating further, Cyril.
Will, tell me about something else. How's North Korea reacting to the U.S. ban on travelers? That means to say Americans are no longer allowed to travel to North Korea, and I know you reported on this.
Yeah, so the travel ban affects nearly all Americans who would come into the country, 1,000 tourists a year, professors teaching here. There are some exemptions to the travel ban. Journalists will still be allowed to report here with special validation, along with humanitarian aid workers and others whose visits to this country are deemed in the best national interest of the United States. But certainly there will be far fewer Americans here. From the North Korean perspective, they will still allow Americans to come visit this country. They say it's a safe place for people who want to visit. And for those who organize American tour trips into the country, they say America loses a lot of its soft power on the ground here because North Koreans will no longer be able to have interactions with Americans that might give them a very different impression of the United States than what North Korean state media gives them.
Will Ripley reporting live from the North Korean capital. Always great to get the point of view from Pyongyang. Thank you very much. Still to come on CNN Today.
I didn't want to lose hope, bro.
A family member recounts the tragic deaths of 6 of his close relatives, including 4 children, in Hurricane Harvey's floodwaters. You'll hear what he told CNN.
Staying informed in association with Accor Hotels.
All new Inside Africa. Unlocking the mysteries behind the continent you thought you knew. South Africa's first major leaguer paves the way for future hopefuls.
Baseball has changed my life. I think in more ways than I could probably explain to you.
Inside Africa, Sunday, only on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank. 24 hours of amazing experiences in the world's most fascinating cities. From sunrise to sunset and into the night. James Williams kicks things off in New York City. Deep beneath Grand Central Terminal lies a secret place not open to the public. Get your VIP tour and visit the most expensive penthouse in the world with amenities perfect for the elite traveler. New York City in 24 hours. Wednesday on CNN.
Los Angeles and California, when you think about everything that has come out of there, it's an influential place.
People marching onto City Hall here in San Francisco.
We break those stories that are unique.
Donald Trump came all the way down here, and then the issue of who would pay for the wall never came up.
You question people to get straight answers. You didn't name Bill Cosby then. Why now?
The vast majority of people I talk to have amazing stories to tell. One place to get it right, to get it quick.
Tune in and come along for this ride.
I'm Jim Bitterman in Paris, and this is CNN.
Hey everybody, welcome back to CNN Today. Your headlines this hour. An urgent search has been ongoing in Mumbai at the scene of a deadly building collapse. At least 24 people were killed. Crews have rescued at least 37 people so far. Officials say the building had been deemed unsafe in 2013, but some families continued to live there. Iraq is celebrating what it says is another major defeat for ISIS. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi officially declared victory in Tel Afar. U.S.-backed Iraqi troops began their battle for Tel Afar just a week and a half ago. It was one of the few remaining ISIS strongholds in Iraq. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence put on his work gloves and pitched in helping survivors of Hurricane Harvey with cleanup efforts in Rockport, Texas. He says more than 311,000 people have applied for disaster aid. He's promising that the White House will work with Congress to get billions of dollars in recovery funds flowing into the storm zone. And perhaps the most tragic story to emerge from Hurricane Harvey is what happened to the Saldivar family. 6 family members, including 2 grandparents and 4 young children, were killed when the van they were trying to escape in fell into a ravine filled with floodwaters. CNN's Alison Camerota spoke with the brother of the driver about the family's tragic loss.
I see your haul of photos. Tell me about some of them.
Well, of course, this is Mom when she was younger. She sent this picture to her mother, actually. That's what's written there.
Beautiful.
And, Dad, who was in Air Force.
This is during the Korean War?
Yes.
When you knew that Hurricane Harvey was heading here, your family came up with a plan. So what was that plan?
The day before, I told Sammy, I said, all right, what do you plan on doing? You know, and he said that, well, I'm gonna stay up, and if the water starts coming up, I'll put them in my truck and I'll take them to your house. That's okay. That'll work.
But then something went wrong with that plan. What happened?
Fell asleep. You know, my wife was texting with him. He said, "No, I'm awake. You know, I'm gonna stay up." And then he sent us a voicemail, which we didn't hear because we fell asleep. And he said that I fell asleep. You know, the water's in the house.
It's just me. I guess we gotta get out of here. I fell asleep and the neighbor just woke us up. Water's already coming in the house. Alright, I don't know where we're going or who to call, what to do. Okay, bye.
So then, when he realized that he had fallen asleep, it was starting to get too late. The water was encroaching on their house.
Yes.
But then he figured out that he could still get out because your brother had left a van.
Yes. We called Danny, and Danny said, go to my house. I got my van there. Just get the keys. You can get in the house and, you know, clean up and whatever, and then you can take them to Rick's house. You know, that was the plan. So Sammy actually got in the house and dried up Mom and Dad's clothes, put them in the dryer, made them some breakfast, and then, you know, he got everybody in the van. Now, at the same time, Danny said, could you go across the street? Because his grandkids were across the street. Can you go across the street and get my grandkids and take them to Rick's house? And Sammy said, yeah, I can do that.
And what did you recommend that he do?
Well, I told him, I said, if you're gonna leave, you better leave now because that neighborhood in Allison flooded. And I said, it's gonna get bad. You better get over here now. So he put him in the van and everything. He was coming this way. And then after that, I don't know, I guess it was about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, we lost contact with him. For about 2 hours. Nobody knew where Sammy was.
How did you find out what had happened across that bridge?
Well, my sister-in-law called me and said that she was hysterical and said, Sammy lost control of the van, and mom and dad are gone, and my kids are gone, and my grandkids are gone. I said, what are you talking about? What happened? Sammy lost control of the van, and it went into bio, and everybody's gone. I finally got a hold of Sammy. He said that of course he was barely be able to talk, and he was saying that he was going down Lay Road and or Green River Lay Road, I'm not sure, and they came up to a bridge where Lay Road and Green River come together, and the bridge was overflowed, but Dad said, go, I mean, you can make it, I can see the guardrail, go, and Sammy, so, we were taught, I mean, you listen to your dad, I mean, Dad was real demanding even at 84 years old, and he said, so he went, and like I told Sammy, I said, I can't see myself doing anything different, Dad told me to go, I would have tried to make it. Of course, like anybody else, he panicked, he said Mom and Dad were underwater, they were underwater, and he got out of the van, he didn't even take off his seatbelt, the window was halfway open, he just got out, and he came out, he grabbed a branch or a twig, what he called it a twig, I don't know if it was a branch or tree or what, and the kids were screaming, he can hear them screaming and crying, of course they wanted out of the van, and he kept yelling at them, climb out the back, get out the back doors.
And that's one of the most heartbreaking parts of this incredibly heartbreaking story, is that your brother witnessed it all happening.
Yeah, the van go down knowing his parents are in it, his great nieces and nephews are in it, and it's his brothers, which are brother Danny, his grandkids.
How did you get the word today that they had actually found the van?
Danny called me and said his son Andrew found the van. He was by himself. He went over there by himself and to find it. I don't know if he had anybody else. He just told me Andrew was there, and he could see the van under the water.
And he told you that they had found the bodies?
Yeah, well, I basically, I knew then, they said a diver went down and they could see 2 adults in the front seat, and they couldn't see in the back of the van.
And so you were very close with your parents?
Oh, yes, all of us were,
And to lose them so suddenly is...
Yeah, it's
a bigger challenge.
Yes, but at their age, you start getting ready for it. You start keeping little messages that Dad puts on your phone.
But you wanted a memento of your parents.
Yes, I wanted to hear like he was calling me on the phone. Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to hear Dad.
So many people around the country and around the world have heard your story. It's really just gripped the whole country.
Yeah, my neighbors came over and gave me a hug and said they were so sorry. Whatever you need, everybody, just whatever you need. I guess they can imagine going through something like this, And like I told him, sheriffs, I said, I'm just so glad you saved my brother. I didn't want to lose my brother.
If you really love what you do, you become very passionate about it. Being human, you react from time to time. Sometimes good, people like it, sometimes bad, people don't like it. I've been on both sides.
The circuit meets 4-time Formula One world champion Sebastian Vettel.
The Circuit, Saturday on CNN, in association with DHL. All new African voices. This week, these musicians are hitting all the right notes.
What I love most about performing is that I can be able to share like what I have in me.
African Voices, Saturday on CNN.
The markets of the Middle East are some of the most important in the world today, with opportunities around every corner and development that never seems to stop. The Middle East is investing in its future, establishing new relationships every day. But what does the next decade look like for these emerging markets? I'm right in the middle of it, bringing you the answers and analysis you can only get on CNN.
Marketplace Middle East, Sunday on CNN.
The mayor of London says British Prime Minister Theresa May needs to get a grip on Brexit. Sadiq Khan told CNN that her government has no game plan for its divorce from the European Union. And both the UK and the EU are expressing frustration with negotiations this week. For more, here's CNN's Erin McLaughlin.
Well, the chief Brexit negotiator for the EU, Michel Barnier, saying that there has been no decisive progress on the key withdrawal issues during this latest round of talks, but both sides agree that the starkest differences, the most concerning differences, lie with the financial settlement issue. This week, the UK gave a over 3-hour-long PowerPoint presentation in which it picked apart the legal basis for the EU's position on this issue. Barnier says the following was his takeaway from the presentation. Take a listen.
After this week, it is clear that the UK does not feel legally obliged to honour its obligations after departure.
Well, that is in reference to the obligations of the EU 28 and third parties. He cited as an example the long-term loan guarantees between the EU and Ukraine. He said that the EU 27 taxpayers should not have to pay for the obligations of the EU 28. Now, Brexit Secretary David Davis, for his part, says that the UK will honor its legal and moral financial obligations. However, he says that he's obliged to the UK taxpayer to scrupulously pick apart the EU position, checking it for its legal basis, saying that the UK's legal interpretation of the so-called Brexit bill is very different to the EU's position. Now, senior EU diplomats I've been talking to said there needs to be progress on this issue in the form of a firm commitment from the UK, a formula covering the UK's liabilities. Otherwise, there will be no moving on to the next phase of talks. Erin McLaughlin, CNN Brussels.
Tech news now. Apple fans now know when they can get a glimpse of the company's new gadgets. September 12th is the date. That's when Apple will hold its annual product launch. This year is expected to be a big one. It's been 10 years since Steve Jobs unveiled the first iPhone, and it's also the first time the event will be held at the company's new spaceship-like headquarters. And staying with space, the breakout droid from the last Star Wars film is about to meet its dark side. It seems that the lovable BB-8 now has a nemesis. Meet BB-9E. A robotics company is giving us a first look at this evil twin on what's known as Force Friday. That's a shopping event when new merchandise is released ahead of the new Star Wars films. So the BB-9E toy goes on sale this Friday for $149. You can see it on the big screen on December 15th when Star Wars: The Last Jedi hits theaters. Thank you very much for watching CNN Today. I'm Cyril Vanier. Patrick Snell is up next with World Sports. You're with CNN. Stay with us.